I think it's a difficult space to be in because the agency they do need the revenue that's generated from these user fee programs. I think that there's a lot of work to do. I think that this conversation is well understood and appreciated, but there's still a lot of room for engagement and participation by this sector of the industry.
Hello, and welcome to FDA Watch. This is, as you know, the only independent national forum dedicated to discussing the latest developments involving FDA. I'm your host, Wayne Pines, and I welcome you again to this episode. I want to remind you, as I do at the beginning of all of our episodes, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, you can do so. Go to fdawatch.net, go to the bottom of the screen, and you'll see where you can enter your email, and then you say submit. And henceforth, you will get an email whenever a new episode is posted. In this episode, we're going to be diving into the latest issues in cosmetics. But first, let's get to some headlines. And boy, have there been a lot of headlines lately coming out of FDA. We all saw the issuance of the new MAHA, Make America Healthy Again report from HHS, 19 pages long, deals with just about every area of FDA. It's basically a list of all the things that Secretary Kennedy and presumably Commissioner Makary want to achieve to make America's children healthier. Deals also with agricultural issues. It's broader than just even HHS. For the most part, only a single sentence or paragraph is used to describe the many, many goals that they have. We don't have time to even summarize the report, but it's absolutely essential reading for any FDA watcher. You can get a copy by going to the HHS website, which is hhs.gov, and then click on the press room, and that'll take you to the press release, and you can click on there and get the MAHA report. On the same day that the MAHA report was issued, President Trump signed an executive order regarding direct-to-consumer advertising. Commissioner Makary sent letters to all pharma companies saying that new rules and much stricter enforcement is coming for DTC promotion, especially social media. You can see the press release they issued at the same hhs.gov website. Again, this is essential reading for anyone who's involved with consumer promotion of medical products. There will be a deluge of controversy about this action. There are likely to be court challenges. We'll follow this in future podcasts, but for now, at least from my standpoint, we're waiting for the dust to settle on this announcement. From the Pharma and Device Desk, the Office of Management and Budget released its spring 2025 regulatory agenda in early September. It lays out the planned and proposed and final rules the federal government plans to issue. This is the first regulatory agenda published by the Trump administration and includes 48 proposed and final rules from FDA on drugs, biologics, medical devices, clinical trials, including the agency's plans to propose a modification to the National Drug Code format. In the future podcast, we'll see how industry responds to the OMB agenda. Headline from the Foods Desk: FDA launched its new nationalized entry review program. This is a new system that aims to standardize and improve the review of imported products, of course, including foods. And the program basically calls for a nationwide centralization of the process. FDA also has a new communication channel for initial review inquiries, and you can get that at NER Inquiry, capital N, capital E, capital R, Inquiry, at fda.hhs.gov. And finally, from the Cosmetics Desk, we all saw a headline a few weeks ago. The EU banned gel nail polishes that continue to be sold in the U.S. The reason for the ban is the inclusion of the ingredient known as TPO. It's an ingredient that allows nail polish to harden and last longer. The EU linked TPO to long-term fertility problems. We'll see if this EU action brings this issue more to the forefront in the US, and we're keeping an eye on this issue as well as other cosmetics issue. So those are our headlines. Lots going on in the FDA world. We'll continue to stay on top of them in this podcast. Our guest today, Meredith Petillo. Meredith is the Vice President of the Technical and Regulatory Services at the Nonprofit Trade Association, Independent Beauty Association. She has 20 years of experience in cosmetics regulatory affairs. She spent her career in legal and regulatory departments in the cosmetics and personal care industry. So welcome to FDA Watch, Meredith.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump right in. Some recent news about sunscreens. Sunscreens, of course, are regarded as the classic product that are regulated both as cosmetics or regarded as cosmetics by most people, but actually FDA regulates sunscreens as over-the-counter drugs if they make drug claims. Several sunscreen brands, including a brand called Supergoop and Vacation, received warning letters from FDA recently. We mentioned this in our last episode as well, but I just wanted to start out, Meredith. What are the issues involved with these warning letters?
So these warning letters have been of great interest to the beauty industry. They've been all over the trade press. And so there's a few reasons why these warning letters are particularly interesting. One is the dosage format. So these are specifically talking about whipped or sort of foamy sunscreen products that resemble like a whipped cream food product. And then in addition to the format, FDA did mention this sort of foodification and their concern about the potential for a consumer to mistake or confuse these sunscreen products for an edible product.
And what are the implications for the industry and for other companies in terms, from this? What's the takeaway?
So one, the sunscreen monograph is incredibly important to revisit and to make sure that if you're involved in anything that has to do with monograph drugs, that you're adhering exactly to the monograph. That's the number one takeaway. So in the dosage formats that are listed for sunscreens, the foam, mousse, whipped format is not listed in the final order, nor is it included in the proposed order. So for those who've been tracking sunscreen regulation, there's been a lot of activity over a very, very long time. And this proposed monograph is available on the FDA website. And that will actually reduce the number, if passed as drafted, as currently written, would reduce the number of permitted dosage forms for sunscreens. So brands and manufacturers really need to revisit the monograph to make sure that they're following it exactly.
I just want to pick up on one of the words you used, foodification. That means, I presume, that there are cosmetic products that are marketed, to look like foods or with food-like names or food-like packaging. You've been in the industry for a long time. Is that a new trend or is it an increasing trend?
So it is not a new trend. It's been around for many decades. However, I think there's an increase in the volume that we're seeing, the different types of products. Just a few weeks ago, I don't know if the audience is familiar with the Lipstick Lesbians, but Alexis and Christina put amazing content out about product development in the cosmetics sector. And they had a post a few weeks ago that was talking about, has foodification of beauty gone too far? And I found myself literally talking back to the screen saying, yes, oh my gosh, you're speaking to me. So it's, talking about cosmetics that are marketed in food-like formats, food-like names, packaging, imagery, and you're seeing this all over the place, whether it's the product itself or the advertising in traditional, advertising channels and especially on social media.
And, I'm just curious about what the marketing strategy is there. Why would that appeal to people to have a cosmetic that is packaged with or that has a food-like name? What's the strategy there for a company to do that?
Not being a marketer, being a regulatory person, I'm going to take a crack at this. But it's appealing. It's there are scents and flavors and imagery that's familiar, and I think also kind of plays into this trend for clean. There's a perspective that natural is preferable by some consumers, and so the mixing of the worlds between food and beauty, I think, is a very appealing strategy to certain marketers in this industry, but that is not without risk.
Right. And what do the recent warning letters tell you about what FDA is thinking about this?
So their mention of the concern that they would have of consumers mistaking these products for a food item is something that I think the industry, the OTC industry, and the cosmetics industry in general, even if you're not making sunscreens, really need to pay attention to. And understand that this is not something that is specific just to this particular format of a sunscreen product. And adverse event reporting has been in place for a long time for OTCs. With MOCRA, it is now mandatory for cosmetics, and so it's always been important to make sure that your consumer is using your product as intended and safely. But now your brand has an obligation to monitor adverse events and to report serious adverse events. And so if there's encouragement by the brand for consumers to potentially ingest the product, or if there's confusion, it really is something that all of the teams who are involved in putting those products on the market need to be looking at, discussing, evaluating, understanding potential risks, and understanding what they would do if something were to, some crazy challenge were to get posed on social media and your product is being highlighted in a way that you may not have intended.
Yeah. Plus, there are legal implications, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you see FDA headed on that? Are they going to clamp down, or we now have, as you've seen, a very active FDA, always concerned about public health. In this case, expressing it sometimes a little bit differently than in the past. But where do you see FDA headed on this?
It's going to be an interesting one to watch because FDA and I think HHS, the administration right now seems very focused on food and the pharma side of the drug business, but it's reasonable to assume that focus is going to expand to these OTC monograph categories and to cosmetics. So anything that could be perceived as a risk to the U.S. consumer, I think that's something that industry needs to be tracking and proactively understanding. I think that FDA, they gave a clear indication to industry that they are looking at monograph enforcement. And so I think, there's those who have maybe taken liberties and there's you can make an analogy to speeding, right? Like just because, if the speed limit is 65 and you're driving along at 80 and you haven't gotten a ticket, it didn't mean that it was okay. It didn't mean that it was legal. It didn't mean that it was safe. It means that you just didn't get caught. So we need to watch for more enforcement of the existing monographs and what the broader implications will be to the beauty sector overall.
I just want to broaden the discussion a little bit. How can brands balance the consumer demand for novelty of products, for various trends? We see a lot of social media trends just about every day, with the need to balance that out with compliance and with safety substantiation in this environment today. How do you do that balance?
You need to be cross-functionally collaborative across your entire organization. Regulatory and the legal team should not be a siloed sort of checkbox, right? Um, from product ideation and the concept through product development and through the marketing and advertising journey, all of the different teams that are involved in getting these products to market and then are involved with keeping them on the market should be talking about all of this. They should be looking at what are the potential risks, and not as a way to stifle innovation or to stifle creativity, but as a way to make sure that the consumer is getting the best and the safest product from your organization.
And what kind of, you monitor the industry. I know you do, focus on regulatory affairs, but of course you monitor what's going on in the industry in terms of product development. Uh, is this, this industry seems to be very innovative. Not that all American industries are not, but this is an innovative industry. Where is the innovation going? And again, I'm going to ask you how, whether the current FDA with MOCRA, with the new rules, how is it affecting the innovation that's occurring within your industry?
Yes, and absolutely. It's a privilege to be working for the Independent Beauty Association, representing the indie sector, so the entrepreneurs and the founders, where you're seeing so much of this innovation work coming from these brands and these founders. It's a really interesting time, not only in looking at FDA oversight and regulation, but in addition to all of the state legislative and regulatory activity, and from various different channels, right? So we're used to seeing legislation and regulation talking about the formulations. And the states have picked that up, and you're seeing a lot more ingredient restrictions and prohibitions. There's also a lot of work being done on packaging, and you're seeing EPR laws going into effect, and they may include reuse and refill, requirements. You're seeing PCR mandates, so states that are requiring plastic packaging to have a certain amount of post-consumer resin recycled material, by certain staggered implementation dates. And all of these things are not necessarily done thinking about one another. Refills and reuse is an incredible challenge for the industry, and it's an area that's going to require innovation and a lot of consideration for regulatory compliance, legal compliance, as well as consumer safety. So seeing where all of the potential points of friction are going to kind of come together as some of these massive legislative frameworks go into implementation is going to be incredibly. It's going to be have a big impact on the innovation in this industry and probably several others. There is an observation that some companies may be spending more time in reformulation in order to make sure that they're in compliance with all of these new state level laws versus true new innovation, new product launches. They're spending more of their resourcing on rework of existing portfolios.
I want to shift gears a second, go back to the federal level, FDA and MOCRA. Just from a 30,000 foot level, what is going on with the implementation at FDA of of MOCRA? Is it going the way that you would like, that your industry would like? What needs to be done better, differently, or is it all fine, just the way it's proceeding? I know that's a loaded question. I know that.
Well, there are a couple of key pieces of regulation that industry is still waiting on from FDA. So MOCRA put out a timeline for some of the mandatory provisions that industry will need to comply with. That includes GMPs, and also the labeling of fragrance allergens. The deadlines for those rules, the proposed rule to come out have been missed, and I think there is a sense from industry of just when, tell us when are we going to see them? Because these are critical compliance pieces that are missing from the full MOCRA implementation package.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're talking cosmetics with Meredith Petillo of the Independent Beauty Association. And I want to shift gears as we enter the second part of this episode. I want to talk about user fees for OTC drug monographs, which again cut across a lot of the beauty products. Asking, can you, a brief primer on OMUFA and what does it do? Why does it matter to OTC drug and sunscreen and other cosmetic manufacturers?
Sure. So right now, at the time that we're talking about this and recording this podcast, it's a critical time for OMUFA. So that's the User Fee Act for over-the-counter monograph drugs that was passed in 2020 through the CARES Act, and was authorized for 5 years. So we're at this critical point now where it needs to be reauthorized, as many of the other regulated FDA categories, user fee programs need to be. So the end of this month is when Congress has to act to reauthorize OMUFA. So that was OTC monograph modernization. So we saw the sunscreen monograph finalized through that process. We mentioned in the first half that there's also a proposed monograph. So that work came out of OMUFA 1.0. But the action that Congress will or will not take will be critical, to understand the path forward for sunscreens, especially because they've kind of tacked on some other modernization options, legislative options, that would be very interesting, kind of outside of the scope of what OMUFA 1.0 included.
Right, but certainly the legislation will pass, in some form or another, right? Do you have any doubts about that?
Signs are pointing to this getting done, but I certainly am not going to claim that my crystal ball for what goes on the Hill is necessarily accurate. So we shall see.
Yeah, I just heard a conversation with George Tidmarsh, who's the new head of the Center for Drugs, and he was asked about user fees, which of course dramatically affect the Center for Drugs. And generally speaking, everything that I've seen come out of the new leadership at FDA and HHS supports user fees, which is, was not a slam dunk, given where a lot of the people, who were on the Trump team said that they had reservations about user fees. So I think that this legislation is likely to pass, but as you said, there might be, a few changes in it between now and the end of the month. Has OMUFA streamlined the process for updating OTC monographs as intended? Is there anything that can be improved there?
Well, there has been a development. So DSM-Firmenich was I believe, the first company to make use of this OMOR request. For companies wanting to put either a new active ingredient, change the monograph somehow, there's a meeting request that they can put forward to the agency. So there's a tier 1 or a tier 2 OMOR request, and so this their application will be the potential first new UV filter in a very long time. So specific to the monograph sector that overlaps cosmetics and drugs, this would change substantively how these particular monographs have been looked at by FDA for quite some time.
How can OMUFA reforms impact innovation and competition in the OTC space, especially with regard to sunscreens?
So the inclusion of additional UV filters would be something that could allow companies to either bring sunscreen formulations that they're marketing overseas and in other countries or regions, and just provide, I think, products that are more elegant, more user friendly, consumers like more, are safe, are effective, and I think would increase the competitiveness of U.S. sunscreens, not only here in this market, but globally as well.
In the cosmetics area, as in other areas of FDA regulation, there are a lot of small businesses. And I know when MOCRA was being considered, a lot of the small cosmetics companies were concerned about the implications for them, because when you impose major new requirements on a company, small businesses sometimes have challenges. How has small business been able to manage in terms of MOCRA, and also in terms of OMUFA, in terms of the user fees and the OTC monograph process?
Sure. So speaking to MOCRA first, so the small businesses and the independent beauty sector is IBA's membership. So we've been, of course, very closely involved with the the drafting of the language that would go into what is now MOCRA, and then a lot of dialogue with our members about potential impacts. And so small business has been rising to the challenge. I think the product listing and facility registration was new. It's not new globally, but for some smaller businesses who may be domestic only, who have not yet begun an exporting journey, that was a new process, and potentially involving additional resourcing costs. But our understanding is that that has been going very well within the indie sector, and uh, overall, I think the industry has stepped up to the challenge to ensure compliance and make sure that um, the businesses are acting as good stewards of the industry, and taking the effort to understand what MOCRA means and implementing any changes. I think, as we mentioned earlier, this sort of unease about what's to come, right? I think that there will be great relief when there's clarity and a final answer on GMPs and fragrance allergens.
And I want to ask you one final question about just from an FDA standpoint. Cosmetics regulation has historically been, I'll say, underfunded. The emphasis at FDA has been drugs, devices, foods. Cosmetics has been handled, from his funding standpoint, as an orphan almost. What impact has the cutback in personnel at the agency had on cosmetics oversight? And in terms of the cutbacks that are coming in the FDA budget compared with the present budget, how do you see cosmetics regulation being affected by that?
So I can't speak to specifics on, headcount at FDA. There's been, in addition to everything that you've mentioned, there's been, quite a bit of other change as well. So cosmetics were moved out of CIFSAN and under the Office of the Chief Scientist a little while ago. The leadership in that department has undergone some change as well as to we had when we originally the move was made, it was Dr. Namanje Bumpus. She's no longer with the agency, and so that was a substantive change, and would have I'm sure there are going to be budget impacts that are always involved in sort of reorganizations. And then, in addition to that, those who are familiar with the cosmetics industry know that Dr. Linda Katz had been overseeing the Office of Colors and Cosmetics for quite some time, and she has recently retired. So there are many changes going on within the agency specific to cosmetics, but I don't know that we fully understand, the long-term implications to any personnel change, overall personnel headcount changes or budget changes just yet.
Right. I think a lot of the industries feel the same way with all the changes that are taking place. And I presume that the industry is reaching out to the new leaders at FDA and trying to get their attention on relevant matters. Okay. Is there anything else that we should be talking about, with regard to updating on user fees and on sunscreens and on budgets and everything?
The last thought that I would just leave you with, just speaking about OMUFA and the reauthorization, is a note that for the user fees themselves, for the monograph facilities, and also for these OMOR meeting requests, right? There are no small business considerations or tiers, right? So depending on the categorization of where you fall, if you are a facility, whether you're a contract manufacturing facility or you're vertically integrated, you are paying the same fee regardless of business size or regardless of how many monograph products one might make. So a facility that's primarily a cosmetics facility that makes just one sunscreen lip balm, they would be paying the same facility fee as a much larger OTC focused company. The same thing for the OMOR meetings. It's very challenging for small business to participate in that type of meeting because those tier 1 and 2 OMORs are over $100,000 and over $500,000, depending on which tier you're talking about, which can be financially just unattainable by small businesses looking to kind of participate in that mechanism of interaction with the agency. That's been IBA's, that was our sort of reason to be at the table with OMUFA and the reauthorization conversations was, representing this segment of the industry, representing small business, and specifically for that subset of monographs that are that in that overlap space that you mentioned of cosmetics and drugs. Rather than being used occasionally to treat something that may be, intermittent or sporadic, these are products that are being used every day. So, IBA has been encouraging and championing that, while, the agency needs to be properly funded, of course, that there be some way to include small business considerations, because of the nature of this particular segment of the industry.
Right. And do you get the sense that this administration, which is obviously, sensitive to businesses generally, will be receptive to your concerns?
I think it's a difficult space to be in because, as we mentioned, they need the funding. The agency does, they do need the revenue that's generated from these user fee programs. I think that there's a lot of work to do. I think that this conversation is well understood and appreciated, but there's still a lot of room for engagement and participation by this sector of the industry. So I would highly encourage anyone who is a stakeholder in indie beauty and hasn't been, tracking this or hasn't been participating in the conversation to get in touch with your trade association. I certainly can recommend, speaking with the team here at IBA, and make sure that the voice of this sector is heard, now and ongoing in the future.
Okay. With that, I'm going to turn briefly to another segment of our podcast, the resource link. We provide our listeners with some valuable links that they might want to check out. All of these links are available on our website, fdawatch.net. fdawatch.net. There's no need to write anything down. Just remember fdawatch.net. First, our pharma resource link. As I mentioned before, I just heard George Tidmarsh, the director of the Center for Drugs, talk about what his plans are. And he spent a lot of time talking about rare diseases, orphan drugs. On September 3rd, FDA announced the CDER-CBER Rare Disease Evidence Principles, or RDEP process. For drugs accepted for review under the RDEP process, FDA expects that substantial evidence of effectiveness, and I'm going to quote now from the announcement, may generally be established based on one adequate and well-controlled study that may be a single-arm trial, together with robust data that provides strong confirmatory evidence of the drug's treatment effects. RDEP doesn't change the statutory standard for approval, but it does, and I quote again, offer the assurance that drug review will encompass additional supportive data in the review. We're going to have a podcast next month on rare diseases. And again, as I mentioned, there seems to be a clear understanding on the part of the new agency leadership about the unique aspects of orphan drugs and also orphan devices. And that's an important consideration for a lot of people. There are 30 million Americans who are affected by rare diseases. So that's good news for that community. Our resource links goes to the FDA press release about RDEP, and you can learn more about this initiative. Devices resource link. We couldn't go one episode without mentioning AI. Meredith, we talked for a long time, and we didn't mention AI once. There was a story in a publication called Healthcare Brew, and on FDA's website, the number of agency-cleared AI-enabled medical devices nearly doubled from fewer than 700 in 2023 to over 1,200 as of August 28th of this year. There's a kicker here. Publicly traded companies' devices, which are constituted about 92%, were recalled more frequently than devices from private companies. And why is this important? According to a professor at the Johns Hopkins Business School, who was a co-author of the original analysis, he said, investors, they want to see year after year, you have new AI devices cleared by the FDA, you have AI devices being rolled out among healthcare providers, so the pressure itself may have contributed to the recall. It's an interesting story, and again, our resource link provides a link to the healthcare brew story. Our foods link, FDA has amended its food additive regulation for the safety of hydrogen peroxide as an antimicrobial agent in food production. According to Food and Safety magazine, the move was made in response to a food additive petition by Cargill, which proposed to further amend regulations to provide for the use of hydrogen peroxide in food, including meat and poultry. The final order was published in the Federal Register. We've included a link to the magazine. And finally, come to the cosmetics section here. IBA is hosting a virtual conference November 12th and 13th. It's called the IBA Cosmetics Convergence Conference. The agenda includes timely and practical compliance topics for the cosmetics industry. Details can be found on the IBA homepage, which is available through the resource link on our site, again, fdawatch.net. On that note, it's time to thank Meredith for being such an outstanding guest. We really appreciate your time and your insights into what's going on in the cosmetics and in the OTC monograph area. Also like to thank the podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I want to remind you, if you want to be a guest on our show, if you want to be a marketing partner, if you want to be a sponsor or just comment on the show, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net, info@fdawatch.net, and that's also our website, fdawatch.net. And finally, we'd appreciate if you're so inclined, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does make a difference. And as I said at the top of the podcast today, follow us and subscribe. And you subscribe, I'm going to repeat for the final time, our website, fdawatch.net. And as we say, at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.